The people whose story is never told about their origin, or rather, the people who have never told us about their origin. But what would be the origin of the mysterious indigenous people? Or rather, what would be the origin of indigenous peoples, those called by some as Native Americans? Come with me and discover, according to the Bible, what is the origin of indigenous peoples, in another video from our series The Origin of Peoples According to the Bible. The indigenous peoples of the Americas, as well as the natives of Siberia and Russia, have their genetic origin traced to one of the descendants of Japheth, son of Noah. What would be this offspring that gave rise to the Indians? The offspring in question is the offspring of Gomer's son, Togarmah. Togarmah is the first father of the indigenous peoples, being also the father of the Asian peoples. In addition, he is the father of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and Siberia, specifically the natives of Siberia. Togarmah is the first ancestral father of the indigenous peoples, being the second, one of the tribes of the descent of Ham, father of the black peoples. But back to Togarmah, the first father of indigenous peoples. The DNA tests of the genetics of indigenous peoples pointed out and found at the primary and partially majority origin of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and Russia, in the case of Siberia, came from peoples of Asia, that is, from the descent of Togarmah. Togarmah is one of the parents of Native Americans, being mostly the father of indigenous peoples. This is not only a genetic fact of DNA, but also an evident fact in the appearance and traits of indigenous peoples. The features and appearance of indigenous peoples are characterized by pulled eyes and dark, straight hair. The eyes pulled by themselves already denote and show where the origin of indigenous peoples came from, which is an Asian origin of Togarmah descent. However, the descendants of indigenous peoples are not only descendants of Togarmah, father of Asian peoples. The dark or brown skin tone, with a light brown color, refers to the descent of one of the tribes of the Hamite peoples, that is, the black peoples. Evidently, the mixture of the descendants of Togarmah, who have light skin and slanted eyes, with the genetics of one of the tribes of Ham, resulted in this aspect of brownish tone, which is observed in indigenous peoples, even reaching the dark tone. Another fact to highlight is the meaning of the name Togarmah. The linguistic etymology of the word refers to broken or pulled, referring to the slanted eyes of his descendants and even himself. Now, who was and how to identify the second father of indigenous peoples? Undoubtedly, the second father of the indigenous peoples is Ham, as many of them have brown and dark skin tones, which refers to the Hamite descent. In other words, indigenous peoples are a mixture of Ham and Japheth, that is, of Ham and Togarmah. Brown and light brown skin tone is quite common among indigenous people. Another feature that refers to the black Hamite origin of indigenous peoples, such as the Mayans, Aztecs and Incas, is the evident presence of the Negroid nose in their sculptures. This trait is not only restricted to the indigenous peoples of the Americas, such as the Mayans, Aztecs and Incas, but is also observed elsewhere and in other indigenous peoples. An extremely interesting fact is the existence, in Africa, of a people known as Khoisans. This tribe is one of the oldest on the African continent and stands out for having characteristics such as slanted eyes and a variation in skin tones, with some individuals being lighter in color compared to other Africans. This indicates a strong genetic influence coming from the Hamite tribe, revealing a connection between the indigenous and Asian peoples of Togarmah. This similarity can be observed in the native peoples of Siberia, who are very similar to Asians due to their slanted eyes, fair skin and straight dark hair. In addition, there is another ethnic group that also shares similar characteristics with Asian peoples. This is due to the same origin of indigenous peoples and Asians. More specifically, indigenous peoples descend from the Togarmah peoples, who are also present in North America. In Native Americans, some have fair skin, while others have darker skin tones, and their facial features are a little more reminiscent of black people. However, the hair remains dark and straight. Interestingly, in some Asian peoples of Siberia, you can even find red hair. When looking at this image of a child, it is natural to question whether he is of Asian or Indian origin, as there is a striking similarity. If we dress this child in Japanese geisha attire, it could easily be mistaken for a Japanese child. An interesting fact is that all indigenous peoples, regardless of their geographic location, such as American Indians and Siberian natives, have a similar basic structure in their construction of huts and houses. This demonstrates a close connection between these people, who come from different tribes. According to biblical tradition, the indigenous tribes are believed to have dispersed throughout the Americas and other regions, coming from Togarmah and one of the Hamite tribes. Another curiosity that connects them to Asian peoples is the presence of slanted eyes and extremely straight and dark hair. In addition, there is another aspect that brings them closer to the African peoples descended from Cam. All the Indians have drums, instruments that refer to Africans. Another point that connects them to the Asian descendants of Togarmah is the use of instruments such as the flute, which reveals a close and common origin to virtually all indigenous natives. The flute is an instrument very present in Asia, which has several similar instruments in other regions. Look closely at this indigenous child and note its features: hair, slanted eyes, and skin tone. Now, compare and see the similarity with this other child of Asian origin. Notice the similarities. This indigenous child could easily pass for a Filipino child, as some Asian countries have received a small Hami influence. However, in the case of indigenous peoples, their origin goes back to Japheth and Ham, more specifically to Togarmah and one of the tribes of Ham. I hope you enjoyed the video about indigenous peoples and their origin, as described in the Bible, from the book of Genesis, chapter 10. Many peoples in the Americas have this descent. Practically all Brazilians, for example, have indigenous ancestors. In North America there are also many peoples with this ancestry.